We're late. Should we even bother beginning? Okay.
Do you want me to go and try to get him?
No. No, no. We don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, if it is indeed a molehill. Certainly no reason to.
Okay.
Yes. So, the words of introduction. The Jewish, not in the text now, because just introduction. The Jewish calendar is a Jewish calendar. Is that funny?
Not yet. But I'm sure there's a punchline.
Yeah. So the Jewish calendar is a fixed calendar. In fact, the Jewish calendar was established some 1900 years ago by a sage called Hillel, and it is uncannily accurate thousands of years later vis-a-vis the moon cycle and the relationship to the sun and so on. It's accurate down to a fraction of a second. Now, our calendar is again predetermined through rigorous formula and takes into account, when the sages made the calendar, certain considerations as to what days holidays should fall. Without going to any great length now, just for example, one consideration is the sages didn't want Rosh Hashanah should ever start on a Sunday, Wednesday, or Friday, and it never does, therefore, for considerations related to Yom Kippur and Hoshana Rabbah, without going into those considerations. Now, you will notice in the Jewish calendar also that some months have 29 days and some months have 30 days. It's roughly 6 and 6. The reason is because our calendar is a lunar calendar, and the cycle of the moon is 29 and a half and a fraction again days. So it's going to be either, it's not a neat cycle, so it's either going to be to balance. 6 will be 29 and 6 will be 30, and oversimplifying matters. And then there's the leap year. That's because it's a lunar calendar. So if you multiply these 12 months, 29, half 6 by 12, you get approximately 355 days, which is 11 days shy of the solar calendar, which determines the seasons. And the Torah says that Pesach has to be observed in the spring. It also indicates that Rosh Hashanah should be observed in the fall. Therefore, there's a need every 2 or 3 years, as we drop back 11 days every year, to insert a 30-day month to bring our calendar in sync with the seasons. Other cultures, the Chinese calendar is exclusively lunar, and therefore over time their holidays will be celebrated in all seasons as they slip back.
They don't.
Muslims too.
So it's not, it's the Muslim calendar.
Chinese New Year is always January, February, so I don't know.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Like
There is the Islamic calendar.
Yeah, the Islamic calendar.
Yeah, that would be because it's all taken from the
July,
Torah.
sometimes January.
Because it's taken, their whole thing is based on the Torah. It's a distortion of Torah.
Mm-hmm.
The Torah says it's a lunar calendar, so it's a lunar calendar. They don't have the nuance that the Torah says it's lunar, but it's got to be balanced with the solar. So they only, it's the Islamic calendar that will have their holidays, against the backdrop of the seasons, all of them eventually. So the calendar is fixed. However, when the temple existed, which is the interesting thing, the months were not determined by the fixed calendar, by the calculations, but by witnesses. Namely, witnesses would come to the high court in Jerusalem, and they would say that this morning or last night we saw the first sliver of the moon, and they would be then interrogated or examined, and based on their testimony, the court would declare that day is the first day of the month. Now, the court knew exactly if their testimony was authentic, was because they knew exactly where the moon would appear in the sky, down to a millisecond, really, against a millisecond. And so their calculation was, their knowledge of astronomy was critical and valuable to know whether or not the witnesses, in fact, were accurate. But the fact is that it had to be based on testimony. So if it was cloudy and the moon couldn't be seen, even though the court knew exactly where the moon would be, by default, the previous month would have 30 days, which is the maximum. By default. But if witnesses came, that's when the previous month could have 29 days, and day 30 would be the first day of the new month. So in our calendar, you'll realize, of course, that when there's 2 days Rosh Chodesh, that's because day 30 is the first day is day 30 of the previous month, because in actual fact, the month is 29 and a half. It's really into day 30 to some degree. So it is Rosh Chodesh, but it's not considered day 1, because again, the month can start in the middle of the day. So it's either 29 or 30. So 6 would be 30, 6 would be 29. Clear? So 2 days Rosh Chodesh means, always is, that day 30 it means that the previous month had 30 days.
Minimum 2 witnesses.
Pardon?
Minimum 2 witnesses always.
Minimum 2 witnesses, many more, of course. Sometimes, thousands could see it, and people would come. It was a mitzvah to go to the court, even though the court would have seen it themselves. It was a clear day. Now, since we're on the subject, just for our knowledge, so here's the thing. For the rest of the country, so this is, the month is determined by witnesses coming or not coming if it was cloudy. Now, the rest of the country, up north, south, east, west, how did they know when Rosh Chodesh was? Well, for the most part, it was not relevant. But at least 2 times a year, it was relevant. You had to know, well, more than 2 times a year. Holidays. Holidays are days in the month. Right? Yom Kippur is the 10th day of Tishrei. Rosh Hashanah is the first day of Tishrei. Sukkot is the 15th. Pesach is the 15th. These are holy days. When do you observe them? So originally, the Talmud tells us, in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, the court got the message out very quickly, very easily. Namely, if you look at the land of Israel, there are mountains that run, elevated areas that run down its spine, like a spine. So, if in fact the previous month was 29 days, because witnesses had come and seen the day 30, that's the only option. They all knew it's either 30 days or 29 days. So, if in fact the previous month would be only 29 days, because on day 30 they saw the new moon, they came running to the court. In the morning, the court declared today's Rosh Chodesh. So that night, they would light a fire at the Temple Mount, which would be seen by the next mountain, and within hours, the entire country knew that that day was Rosh Chodesh. Count 15 days, and it's Seder night. But then that had to be discontinued, because there were a group of Jews, disciples of a man called Tzadok and his colleague Baisus, and these were disciples of Antigonus, as recorded in the Mishnah. And here's the story behind that. It's a fascinating story. Antigonus is quoted in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot and Ethics of Our Fathers as saying, "Don't be like servants who serve the master for reward. Rather, serve the master altruistically for no reward." So when they heard that, they said, "What? We toil and there's not for reward?" He didn't say there isn't. He just said, "Don't do it for reward." Nonetheless, they were disturbed by this altruism. The truth is that they were really saying was that it's impossible. The human condition is such that there's always an agenda. That's really what they were saying. One cannot be altruistic. Makes you feel good, gives you a sense of purpose. There's some reward. So at any rate, they decided that, to undermine completely the authority of Judaism altogether. They abandoned Judaism. If this is what it is, no. But they realized that nobody would attract, it wouldn't attract any followers. They came up with not the attack on Judaism as a whole, but they said the sages. The written law, that's from God. But the Talmud, the Midrash, that's all fabricated. So therefore they sought to undermine the Bezdin, the authority, the court at every turn. And here was a wonderful opportunity. In a case where it would be a 30-day month because the moon was seen later, or it was cloudy, seen later from when they'd counted day 1 from the previous month, they would light the fires, bottom line, that night, even when it wasn't Rosh Chodesh, and throw the whole country into disarray. People observing Yom Tov a day earlier than they should. Yom Kippur on the 9th rather than the 10th, which is a terrible thing. So therefore the court had to dispense with informing the country through this process of lighting fires at night and send actual messengers. That takes time. On horseback. Problem was, therefore, the people in outlying areas that were more than a 2-day ride from Jerusalem did not know, or let's put it this way, outside Israel, the furthest point in Israel is a 2-week ride, or a 13-day ride. 2 weeks ride is already outside Israel, and they didn't know, because it wouldn't get there in time, whether or not the previous month of 30 days or 29 days, what day is Pesach. They would keep 2 days out of doubt. And that's where was born our custom to this day, in the Diaspora, to keep 2 days Yom Tov. And even though our calendar is fixed, as I said, and we know exactly to the millisecond, we keep the tradition of the Diaspora observing 2 days of all holidays. The exceptions are Yom Kippur, because to fast 2 days is too taxing, so we rely on the calendar, which we know. And Rosh Hashanah is the exception in Israel, that they observe 2 days Rosh Hashanah. That's because even in Israel, even in the early days, when they lit fires, the Yom Tov is today. And so to light that night and to say that today was Yom Tov, so everybody was observing 2 days anyway, because not knowing the previous month of 39 or 29 days. So even in Israel, during the times of when they were accepting witnesses, and they were in the early days, people found out quickly, but it wasn't quick enough to find out for Rosh Hashanah, because here Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah is the same day. So that's the exception. 2 days Rosh Hashanah for Israel, always, even today, even though we have our calendar, because we continue the traditions. 1 day Yom Kippur for us, because we don't fast 2 days. But the other holidays, we continue the tradition of 2 days. This is all the introduction. This is all to, now, just add something else here. The question, of course, begs itself. It's a big imposition. Why are we having 2 days Yom Tov, 2 Seders, when we know exactly when the 15th of Nisan is, for example, just because they did so in the past when they didn't know, but we do know. And why are we continuing, in the words of our sages, minag avoteinu b'yadeinu, the custom of our forefathers, we continue. I mean, really, why? Just because they did. It's no longer necessary. We're no longer relying on witnesses. Now we are using the calculations that they anyway always had, but now that's exclusively defining our calendar. Why are we keeping 2 days? So Chassidus explains, because we need the 2 days in the Diaspora. In the Holy Land, because the atmosphere is holy. So 1 day of Pesach gives you what Pesach has to give you. 1 Seder does the trick. But in the Diaspora, we need a double inoculation, because the environment is not sacred and holy. We're not as responsive. Therefore, we need a double shot, a double l'chaim, as it were. So we keep 2 days in the Diaspora because we need to. Question becomes, this is a fascinating aside, and it's an open-ended question because there are different views to this day. If somebody goes from the Diaspora to Israel to live, there's no question. You live there, so you observe 1 day. What if you're going just for Pesach, for Yom Tov?
Vacation.
Huh?
Vacation, yeah.
Yeah, whatever the reason you're going. Do you keep 1 day like everybody else, or 2 days? Interesting discussion and different opinions on the matter. Now, Shavuot is the exception. I mentioned now Pesach, and I mentioned Shana, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, because they're all days in the month. Shana is day 1, Yom Kippur is day 10, and Pesach and Sukkot are respectively day 15 of different months. Shavuot is different. This is one of the 3 holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, or the 5 holidays, if you include Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that's not determined by the day in the month. How's Shavuot determined? The Torah says you count 49 days from the 2nd day of Pesach. On day 50 is Atzeret. It's a day of cessation of work, of Shavuot. Special offerings are brought, and it's called Shavuot, which means festival of weeks, because it comes after counting 7 weeks.
But if Pesach is a fixed date,
Yes.
and we are counting 49 days from, so wouldn't that make Shavuot also a fixed date? If it's always going to be following?
Okay, it's exactly, good question. It's exactly what we're getting to right now.
Okay.
So here's the thing. Inasmuch, so Pesach has been determined. Pesach is a certain day. But how, it's Pesach is the 15th of Nisan. how long is that month going to be? Is it going to be a 29-day month or a 30-day month? That's yet to be seen during temple times. Will witnesses come? Well, they won't come. Then before we get to Shavuos, there's another full month, Iyar. When will that be? Will that be a 29-day or a 30-day month? So there are three possibilities. Both are 30, both are 29. One is 29, one is 30. That will play itself out. So therefore, the conclusion, this is what happens. When the temple stood, pause button for a second. When the Torah was given, initially, there was a day in the month when it was given. In actual fact, that day is the 6th day of Sivan. That day is the 6th day of Sivan. But in fact, in temple times, when they observed the Yom Tov of Shavuos, it didn't always coincide with the 6th of Sivan. Why? It only coincides, we can actually add it up if you want, but the 6th of Sivan, if in the interim, Nisan and Iyar, one is 29 and one is 30. Then it's going to be the 6th of Sivan. But if both are 29 days, then day 50 is going to be on the 7th of Sivan. If both are 30 days, day 50 of your count, if they're both 30, is going to be the 5th of Sivan. So when the temple stood, many years they would observe the holiday of Shavuos, not on the anniversary of the giving of the Torah, actually, which is the 6th of Sivan. It might be a day earlier or a day later. Because since it's not determined by a fixed day in the calendar, but by a 50-day count, well, 50 days spanning these 2 months, there are three variables, three possibilities, because they could be both 30 or both 29 or 130, 129. And your day 50 will then be accordingly a different day of the final third month. Now, the reality is it's not only true then, but it's true today as well. It's possible today for a Jew to observe the holiday of Shavuos, and it's not on the anniversary of the 6th of Sivan. In the calendar, you all receive the MTC calendar, 6th of Sivan, it's Yom Tov, and for you it won't be. How could this possibly happen? This, by the way, is one of the Rebbe's revelations that the Torah world, oh, wow, and it became a whole discussion. Yeah, what did the Rebbe point out? If you crossed international dateline during this period, so here we are in Montreal. If you go to Melbourne today, so you're going, when you arrive in Melbourne, the reality is, Australia, you lose a day. If you leave today, you don't have a Monday. You're going to arrive Tuesday morning. There was no Monday. You leave Sunday and you arrive Tuesday. You lose a day. They are a day ahead of you. You never had this day. Conversely, if you travel from Montreal from Melbourne to Montreal, you leave on Sunday, you arrive Sunday again. Again, Sunday, another day Sunday. 2 Sundays. You leave Sunday morning and you arrive Sunday afternoon.
Same thing with China.
China, the same thing. There's ways to travel where you don't cross the date line, but if you go the most direct route, you cross the date line. So what's the point? The Torah says, when it comes to the counting of the Omer, it's an individual count. You count 59 days. The Torah phrases it in the singular. It's not, it should be counted by by the court, but it's the individual count. There are other counts which the individual doesn't do, the court does. Nothing to do with the individual, like the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year. That's a court, they establish it. But the Shavuos is a personal count. So therefore, I'm told, you've got to count 50 days, and 49, day 50 is a sacred day, it's Yom Tov. Even if I didn't actually count it, but I have to be able to count it. That's it. I'm saying, even if I didn't count, I didn't do the mitzvah, I didn't count at night. That doesn't change anything. You have to have been able to at least count 50 days. So this means, let me just conclude, I don't know if you're with me.
Yeah.
So if you're going from, let's do the scenario of going from Montreal to Melbourne, because we're 1 day behind, I would observe Shavuos a day after everybody else.
Perfect. That's what
The
we're
day
hoping.
they're observing Shavuos is not Yom Tov for me. For me, it's the 7th of Sivan, and the 8th, you've got to keep 2, 7 and 8.
Because you celebrated Pesach here in Montreal.
Yeah, I started here, and I'm counting 14 days from my day,
Right.
and it's going to be different than their Shavuot because they're a day ahead. And the converse is true. if you travel from Montreal to from Melbourne to Montreal. So because here we are behind, and you already had this day. Doesn't matter, it's the same day twice, but it's a day. So you're going to observe Shavuot the day before everybody, and that's a fact, and that's what the Rebbe discouraged. It creates problems. Don't cross the date line if you travel during this period. But sometimes a person can't help it. He's got to be there. God forbid something happened. He's got to be there, and he comes back home.
You can cross the date line, but don't be there for Shavuot.
But during not this period.
Come home,
if you can go and come back it balances
Shavuot.
out. Not a problem. But it has happened that people have gone there and had to stay there one way or another, and they are observing Shavuot not the same day as everybody else. Which means, friends, when you make your Kiddush, so it's like temple times for the individual. He's observing Shavuot not on the day which coincides with the anniversary of the giving of the Torah, which was, in fact, on the 6th of Sivan. He might be observing it on the 5th or the 7th, like the temple times for the whole country. Practically, this means, aside from, it's Yom Tov for me, I can't drive, I can't turn the light, it's Yom Tov. It also, when he says his Kiddush, and when he says his Amidah, he will not say, today is the day Zman Matan Torotenu. He will just say, it's Chag HaShavuot. But not say this is the day of the festival, the giving the Torah, because the day isn't. It's going to be the day before, the day after. In temple times as well. When they observe Shavuot, not on the 6th of Sivan, because the days in between are either, the months in between are either both 30 or both 29. So earlier, a day later, when they made their Kiddush, they would say Chag HaShavuot Hazeh, but not say the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. Huh?
Quick question
Yes.
on that. So, leaving all that aside, what we're going to do, we're on the second day of Shavuot, we do say Zman Matan Torah.
Second day of Shavuot, it's a separate consideration. We have 2 days, nothing to do with this. The second day is a repetition of day one. This is not part of this whole discussion.
Oh, no, it's just part of the Kiddush.
We do say, because day two, we repeat exactly what happened day one. It's a repetition. Based on, because in the old days, they didn't know which day was the 6th of Sivan. When we observe the 7th of Sivan, it's all based on, because that may be the 6th. It's a separate.
Okay.
And I explained, we know it's the 7th, so why are we having two? Because we need a double shot. Mm-hmm. But in essence, it's really a repetition of day, which is why you say Shechiyonu again. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a repetition of day one, because it might be. There was the doubt that it may be, in fact, the 6th day of Sivan.
We're not sure today or tomorrow, so we'll do both.
We do both, but that's a separate consideration. Right. Here we're saying, we know. He knows what day, the 6th of Sivan, the calendar is, the calendar, it's all established. But your count, your 49 days, ends up a day earlier or a day later because you crossed the date line. All right. Now, that's the fact. Now, here comes the big question. This is very strange. You ask, first of all, any child in Cheder, what's Shavuot? It has many, many dimensions. But number one, it's the festival of the giving of the Torah. So how is it possible? How does it make sense that during temple times and even today, when you cross the date line, you have a Yom Tov, it's Shavuot, but it's not the day the Torah is given? It's very strange. We need to understand this. God in His infinite wisdom, how does He give us laws that ends up, you're observing a Yom Tov, and it's not for the main thing of the Yom Tov? And the second question, a bit of a deeper question, we'll address this. Second question is, Kabbalistically, if you go deeper, it becomes a very strong question. Because what's the deeper reason why we count 49 days and day 50 is the Yom Tov? Because our sages tell us there are 50 gates of wisdom, 50 portals, levels of wisdom. 49 of them are attainable by human endeavor. The 50th gate of wisdom is divine wisdom, that the human mind could not invent or discover. And that's what Torah is. Torah is the 50th gate of wisdom. Infinite wisdom, divine wisdom. That makes our question very strong. So here we are counting 49 days, reaching day 50, and its significance is the 50th Nun Chamish, the Chamishim, the 50th gate of wisdom, which is divine wisdom, which is Torah. That doesn't coincide with the day the Torah is given. In theory, could be a day earlier, a day later, today, and in temple times. Is not day the whole? Here's the question: is not the whole significance of day 50 the celebration of the divine wisdom that God gave us in the Torah? And yet, it's possible you're going to have a Yom Tov, doing it when the temple stood, and it's Shavuot, but it's not Matan Torah. But is not the 50th day all about the giving of the Torah and the divine wisdom? That's why it's day 50. And how is it that in theory it will not coincide with the actual anniversary of when the Torah gave. It only works if there's 29 and 30, and our calendar is neatly, fixed that under normal circumstances, unless you're traveling, you will be observing day 50, and you will say, this is the day the Torah was given, and it's connected with day 50 because 50 represents the divine wisdom. But in theory, they don't coincide. How's that possible? So that's the big question. All of this was an introduction to understand the question. We're not going to go into details now because we're already arriving at Shachar, but just to say that, I'm just going to put this on the table because you can't leave it without some kind of answer. There are two levels to Torah, friends. There are two levels. There is the divine wisdom dimension, and it's divine wisdom. It's infinite wisdom. It's knowledge that no human mind could conceive. And the more you mine the Torah, the more you discover deeper and deeper insight. Here it is, friends. Torah was given 3,301 years ago. We haven't exhausted its riches, and we never will, because the riches in Torah, authored by the divine intelligence, divine mind, is truly endless. But that's the lower level of Torah. Friends, imagine that. The divine wisdom is the lower level of Torah. The divine wisdom is a level which each one of us will access individually, according to our intellectual ability, and according to the effort we invest in study. You invest more effort, you will discover more. Less, you'll discover less. So it comes after the count. We're part of the process. We're part of the process of the discovery and the experience of the 50th portal of wisdom. You count, and then you get it. You don't count, you won't discover it. And everybody's count is individualistic, as symbolized by the fact, if you cross the Dateline or don't, you got a different day, because it's your count. It should be noted that the word count in Hebrew, v'safarta, that's the word you should count. Sapir, not just counting. Sapphire. Sapphire implies enlightenment, illumination, a luminous stone. V'safarta, you should count, means you shall refine yourself, you shall illuminate yourselves as you plumb ever deeper the treasures of Torah and discover the 50th gate, the endless entry into divine wisdom. But that's all the lower level. It's all the lower level.
Question for the calendar.
One second. I just want to get to the thing here. Because we're on the precipice here, the punchline. The essence of Torah is beyond even divine wisdom. It's God Himself. God Himself. I gave myself, says God, in the Torah. And it's beyond your understanding of it. Beyond your understanding. And that paradoxically I've gifted to everyone equally. A child, the scholar, whether you count, whether you don't count, you read a line in Torah, you take it in your arms, you put on the tefillin, you have connected to the very eye of God. This is beyond wisdom. Beyond divine wisdom. And this is gifted to everybody equally. And that's the secret, this resolves the problem. The 6th of Sivan, which is independent of anybody's count, represents the essence, Matan Torah, the gift of Torah, which isn't commiserate and dependent on my investment, my count, my discovery. It's gifted to everybody equally. The 50th gate, that's a personal journey. And to make it clear to us that there are two dimensions, and Chassidus reveals this, the Rebbe reveals this to us, because without Chassidus, what is Torah? It's wisdom, divine wisdom. That's all, which is something extraordinary. But here we're discovering, yes, but that's the lower dimension. There's an essential dimension, which is the eye of God, which everybody gets equally. That's in essence to be explained. I hope you grasped it. Question, yes?
Huh?